My name is Sofia Rivera, and for 28 years, I watched my older brother Marcus live like royalty while I existed as the family's cautionary tale. Marcus was everything our parents wanted. Stanford MBA. Corporate attorney. Six-figure salary by 25. He drove a Porsche, owned a penthouse in downtown Seattle, and brought a different accomplished girlfriend to every holiday dinner. Our parents showcased him like a trophy at every family gathering. I took a different path. After graduating from University of Washington with a degree in social work, I chose to work with foster youth transitioning out of the system. My salary was $42,000 a year. I drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic. I lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Tacoma that I shared with my rescue dog, Luna. To my parents, I was the daughter who wasted her potential. Sofia could have been anything, Mom would tell her bridge club friends, her voice dripping with disappointment. But she chose to work with troubled kids for poverty wages. We gave her every advantage, and she threw it away. Dad was more direct. "You're 30 years old and you rent," he said at my last birthday dinner. "Your brother owned property by 26. When are you going to grow up?" Marcus never defended me. Why would he? My perceived failure made his success shine brighter. But there was someone who saw me differently. Someone who understood that success isn't measured only in dollars and square footage. My grandmother, Abuela Carmen. Abuela Carmen was different from my parents in every way that mattered. She'd immigrated from Mexico at 19 with nothing but determination and her late husband's dream of building something lasting. Together, they'd started with a single rental property in 1974. By the time my grandfather passed in 2003, they owned 11 rental homes across Washington and Oregon, plus the family's main residence, a beautiful craftsman home in Queen and worth $1.8 million. After Grandpa died, Abuela managed everything herself. She was sharp, strategic, and surprisingly tech-savvy for someone in her 80s. She used property management software, tracked every expense in detailed spreadsheets, and could quote occupancy rates and market trends like a seasoned investor. My parents assumed they'd inherit everything. After all, they were the successful ones. Marcus especially acted like the properties were already his, often discussing his future portfolio at family dinners. But Abuela paid attention to different things. She noticed that Marcus visited her twice a year, Christmas and her birthday, and spent those visits talking about his cases and his achievements. He never asked about her health, her properties, or her life. She noticed that my parents called once a week, always with the same script. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Have you thought about updating your will?" But she also noticed that I came every Tuesday evening without fail. I'd bring dinner, her favorite carne asada tacos from the little place on 15th, and we'd eat together while watching Jeopardy. I fixed things around her house. I helped her with technology problems. I listened to her stories about Grandpa and the early days of their investments. I never asked about inheritance. Never mentioned the properties. I was there because I loved her, and she knew it. One Tuesday in March 2019, after I'd helped her troubleshoot an issue with her property management portal, Abuela made tea and asked me to sit down. "Sofia, Mija," she said, her eyes serious. "I need to tell you something important. I'm going to transfer all my properties to you." I nearly dropped my cup. "Abuela, no. I can't. Mom and Dad would." "Your parents have done well for themselves," she interrupted firmly. "They don't need my help. Marcus makes more money than your grandfather and I ever did. But you, Mija, you chose a path of service. You help children who have nothing. You live modestly because you give your time and heart to others. That is true wealth. But the family will. The family will react how they react," she said. "But I won't leave my life's work to people who only see dollar signs. You understand what these properties mean. You understand legacy. And one day, when you're ready, you can use them however you choose. Keep them, sell them, donate the proceeds, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is that they go to someone who won't take them for granted." Over the next 3 months, Abuela worked with her longtime estate attorney, Richard Chen. Together, they established an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary. Every property, every asset, everything, transferred legally and completely. The trust documents were filed with the county. Everything was airtight. Abuela made me promise not to tell anyone. "Let them show their true colors first," she said with a knowing smile. Let's see how they treat you when they think you're getting nothing. I kept that promise for 5 years. Abuela passed away peacefully in her sleep in November 2023, 3 days after her 87th birthday. I was the one who found her. I'd come for our Tuesday dinner and found her in her favorite chair, looking like she was simply resting. The funeral was difficult. I sobbed through the entire service while Marcus checked his phone and my parents networked with distant relatives they hadn't spoken to in years. What my family didn't know was that the moment Abuela passed, I became the legal owner of the Queen and Craftsman House, $1.8 million. 6 rental properties in Seattle, $2.4 million combined. 3 rental properties in Portland, $980,000 combined. 2 rental properties in Tacoma, $640,000 combined. A commercial property in Bellevue, $1.6 million. Various investment accounts, $340,000, total value, approximately $7.76 million. The properties generated $34,000 per month in rental income, which I'd been quietly receiving since 2019. I'd continued working my social work job, I loved it, but I'd also been investing that rental income wisely. I'd funded college scholarships for foster youth. I'd donated to homeless services. I'd built an investment portfolio worth an additional $680,000. My family had no idea. They still saw me as the disappointing daughter with the old car and the modest apartment. They had no idea I was a multimillionaire property owner who chose to live simply because I valued purpose over prestige. But I was about to find out just how little they'd ever valued me at all. 2 weeks after Abuela's funeral, my parents scheduled an estate planning meeting at their attorney's office in downtown Seattle. The email my mother sent was formal, almost clinical. Family meeting regarding Carmen's estate. Tuesday, December 12, 2 p.m. Attorney's office. Attendance mandatory. I knew what was coming. They'd been discussing it at the funeral reception. I'd overheard Mom telling Aunt Teresa that everything would finally be settled properly, and Dad mentioning that Marcus had excellent plans for the portfolio. I dressed carefully that Tuesday morning. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back. I looked exactly like what they expected, the struggling social worker attending an inheritance meeting where she'd likely get nothing. I arrived at the law office at 1:55 p.m. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where my parents and Marcus were already seated. Marcus wore an expensive suit and had a leather portfolio open in front of him, filled with what looked like property management documents. Dad wore his important meeting blazer. Mom had her "I'm about to deliver disappointing news" expression. "Sofia," Mom said coolly. "You're late." "I'm 5 minutes early," I replied, taking a seat across from them. "We've been here since 1:30, Marcus said. "Some of us take family obligations seriously." I smiled politely and said nothing. At exactly 2 p.m., 2 people entered the room. The first was Jeffrey Morrison, my parents' estate attorney, a gray-haired man in his 60s who'd handled their legal affairs for 20 years. The second was someone I recognized but my family clearly didn't, Richard Chen, Abuela's estate attorney and the man who'd drafted the irrevocable trust in 2019. Marcus barely glanced at Richard. He was too focused on Jeffrey. "Thank you all for coming," Jeffrey began, opening a folder. "I've asked you here to discuss Carmen Rivera's estate and—" "Before we begin," Dad interrupted, "I think it's best if we address the distribution clearly. Marcus has prepared comprehensive plans for managing the properties, and we believe—" "Mr. Rivera," Jeffrey said carefully, "perhaps we should review the actual estate documents first." Mom leaned forward. "Jeffrey, we've known you for 20 years. Let's not waste time. Carmen's will from 2008 left everything to Robert and myself, with the understanding that we'd distribute assets to our children as we saw fit. We've decided that Marcus, given his financial expertise and success, should assume management of the rental portfolio. Sofia will receive a small inheritance, perhaps $50,000, which should be more than sufficient given her lifestyle choices." The way she said lifestyle choices felt like acid. Marcus nodded. "I've already contacted property management companies and prepared transition plans. The commercial property in Bellevue alone will require significant restructuring." Actually, Richard Chen spoke for the first time, his voice calm but authoritative. There's been a significant change to Mrs. Rivera's estate plan that supersedes the 2008 will. The room went silent. Marcus looked irritated. And you are? Richard Chen, Mrs. Rivera's estate attorney since 1998. I handled all of her trust and property matters. Trust? Dad's voice sharpened. What trust? Richard opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. In March 2019, Mrs. Rivera established an irrevocable living trust and transferred all of her assets, properties, investments, and accounts, into that trust. The 2008 will is therefore irrelevant, as none of those assets remained in her individual name at the time of her passing. Mom's face went white. That's impossible. She would have told us. She made her decisions deliberately and with full mental capacity, Richard said. I have medical evaluations and witness statements confirming this. The trust was executed properly and filed with all relevant county recorders. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Who's the beneficiary of this supposed trust? Richard looked directly at me. Sofia Rivera is the sole beneficiary. The conference room erupted. What? Marcus shot to his feet. That's impossible. Sofia doesn't even, she can't, this is fraud. Sit down, Mr. Rivera, Richard said firmly. There's no fraud here. Your grandmother made her choice. Mom's voice was shaking. Sofia has no business managing property. She works with foster children. She makes nothing. She's never shown any interest in real estate or investments. Actually, I spoke for the first time, my voice steady. I've been managing the properties quite successfully since 2019. Dead silence. What? Dad whispered. Abuela transferred everything to the trust 5 years ago, I continued. I've been the legal owner since then. I've been collecting the rental income, managing the properties, overseeing maintenance, and making all investment decisions for the past 5 years. The portfolio has increased in value by approximately $1.8 million during that time. Marcus looked like I'd slapped him. You've been, for 5 years, and you never said anything. Abuela asked me not to, I said simply. She wanted to see how the family treated me when they thought I was getting nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mom's expression twisted into something ugly. You manipulated her. An elderly woman with dementia. Mrs. Rivera, Richard interrupted sharply, I have medical evaluations from 2 independent physicians confirming Carmen's complete mental competency in 2019. I also have signed statements from her primary care physician, her accountant, and 3 property managers attesting to her sharp mental state. Any claim of undue influence or diminished capacity will fail. The trust is ironclad. This is insane, Marcus said, his voice rising. Sofia doesn't deserve this. She's wasted her life on minimum wage charity work while I've built an actual career. I have the expertise to manage these properties properly. Actually, Richard said, pulling out another document, let's discuss your expertise, Mr. Rivera. Sofia, would you like to share what your property managers discovered? I'd been dreading this moment, but it had to be done. 3 months ago, I said quietly, my property managers noticed some discrepancies in the maintenance records for the Bellevue commercial property. Abuela had mentioned that Marcus occasionally helped coordinate major repairs for that building. So we conducted an audit. I slid a folder across the table. Marcus had been submitting fraudulent invoices for maintenance work that was never performed. He created fake contractor companies, submitted inflated invoices, and had Abuela's property management company pay them. Then he pocketed the money. Marcus's face went from red to white. That's a lie. The forensic accounting firm found $127,000 in fraudulent charges over 4 years, I continued. We have the fake invoices, the shell company registrations in your name, and bank records showing deposits to your personal accounts that match the fraudulent payments exactly. You have no proof, Marcus started. Richard placed a document on the table. This is a preliminary investigation report from the Washington State Attorney General's office. They've been reviewing the evidence for 6 weeks. Charges will be filed within 30 days. Mom made a choking sound. Dad just stared at Marcus, his golden child, like he was seeing a stranger. But, Marcus stammered. I needed that money. My caseload was down, and Abuela had so much, she wouldn't have missed it. You stole from your grandmother, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. You stole from an 80-year-old woman who worked her entire life to build something meaningful. And you did it because you thought you were entitled to her money. Sofia, Dad said desperately, surely we can work this out. Marcus made a mistake, but his family. We can pay it back. The Attorney General doesn't accept family payment plans for fraud, Richard said dryly. Mom turned to Jeffrey, her voice pleading. There must be something we can do. Contest the trust. Prove Sofia manipulated. Mrs. Rivera, Jeffrey said quietly, I've reviewed the trust documents. They are flawless. Your mother executed this transfer with full legal counsel, medical certification, and witnesses. There's no angle to contest it. And frankly, after learning about Marcus's theft, I'd advise against any legal action that might expose more details about your family's conduct. The room fell silent again. Then Marcus turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes, pure desperation. Sofia, he said, his voice breaking. Come on. We're family. You can't just take everything and leave us with nothing. I made a mistake, okay? I'll pay it back. Just, please. Don't do this. For 28 years, I'd watched this man dismiss me, mock me, and treat me like I was less than. For 28 years, he'd been the golden child while I was the disappointment. For 5 years, he treated me with contempt while I secretly owned everything he thought he'd inherit. And now he wanted mercy. I looked at my mother, who'd spent decades telling people I'd wasted my potential. At my father, who'd been ashamed of my career choice. At my brother, who'd stolen from our grandmother and thought his charm would save him. This meeting is over, I said, standing up. Richard, please send all final documentation to my address. Jeffrey, my family will need to find separate legal counsel going forward. There's a clear conflict of interest now. Sofia, wait, Dad stood up. Your mother and I need to discuss this properly. We're still your parents. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice calm but final. For 28 years, you treated me like a disappointment because I chose service over status. You never asked about my work, my life, or what made me happy. You only cared about appearances and money. Well, Abuela saw through that. She saw who I really was. And she made her choice. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. You'll never see a dime of this estate, Marcus shouted desperately. I'll fight this. I'll sue. I turned back to look at him one last time. You can't sue for what you never had, Marcus. This was never your inheritance. It was never Mom and Dad's. It's been mine for 5 years. Legally, completely, irrevocably mine. Then the trust attorney stood up and faced my family with an expression of professional finality. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard said, gathering his documents, my client has been generous in taking this meeting at all. The trust administration is complete. The properties have been Sofia's for 5 years. There is nothing to contest, nothing to dispute, and nothing more to discuss. Mr. Rivera, you'll be hearing from the Attorney General's office regarding the fraud investigation. For the rest of you, I suggest you focus on supporting your son through his upcoming legal challenges rather than pursuing baseless claims against your daughter. He turned to me. Sofia, shall we? I nodded and followed him out of the conference room. Behind me, I heard Mom start crying. Dad was shouting at Jeffrey about legal options. Marcus was silent. I didn't look back. My phone started ringing before I even reached my car. First Mom, Sofia, please, we need to talk about this rationally. I declined the call. Then Dad, you're throwing away your family over money. Your grandmother would be ashamed. I blocked the number. Then Marcus, you vindictive bitch. I'll destroy you for this. I saved that voicemail and forwarded it to Richard with a note, potential harassment evidence. Over the next 48 hours, I received 63 calls and texts from various family members. Aunts who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to understand my side. Cousins sent concerned messages about family unity. My father's business partner called to lecture me about respect for elders. I responded to none of them. What I did do was meet with Richard and my property management team to ensure everything was secure. We changed passwords on all accounts. We sent formal trespass warnings to my parents and Marcus regarding all properties. We documented every threatening message for potential legal action. Then I did something else. Something Abuela had always wanted me to do but I'd been too hesitant about while she was alive. I established the Carmen Rivera Foundation for Foster Youth, seeding it with $500,000 from the property income I'd saved over 5 years. The foundation would provide college scholarships, housing assistance, and career mentoring for youth aging out of the foster system. I quit my social work job, not because I didn't love it, but because I could do more for these kids with resources than I could with a $42,000 salary and a crushing caseload. I hired a small staff and rented office space. I built partnerships with universities and employers. Within 3 months, we'd awarded our first 10 scholarships. Within 6 months, we'd housed 12 young adults in stable apartments. Within a year, we'd helped 32 foster youth transition successfully to independence. This was what Abuela had meant about legacy. Not properties or investment portfolios, using resources to create real change. 6 weeks after the inheritance meeting, Marcus was formally charged with wire fraud, forgery, and theft in the first degree. The Attorney General's press release detailed how he'd created shell companies, submitted fake invoices, and stolen $127,000 from his elderly grandmother's properties over 4 years. The story made local news. Prominent Seattle attorney charged in grandmother theft scheme. My parents hired an expensive criminal defense team, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fake company registrations had Marcus's signature. The bank deposits matched the fraudulent invoice amounts exactly. The timing of the thefts corresponded with his financial problems that he'd carefully hidden from the family. His law firm suspended him immediately. His professional reputation collapsed overnight. The state bar opened an ethics investigation. In March 2025, facing the possibility of a trial and prison time, Marcus accepted a plea deal, 5 years probation, full restitution of $127,000, 500 hours of community service, and a 3-year suspension of his law license. My parents paid the restitution immediately, desperate to minimize the damage. But the money went into a foundation account, earmarked for foster youth aging out of the system. Marcus never apologized to me. Never acknowledged what he'd done. He just looked at me across the courtroom with bitter, defeated eyes, like I'd somehow wronged him by exposing his crimes. My parents stood by him, of course. In their narrative, Marcus had made a mistake under financial pressure, and I was the cruel daughter who'd destroyed her brother's life instead of handling it privately. The irony was almost funny. I was the villain for not covering up his crimes against our grandmother. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I had more important things to do, like meeting with a young woman named Jessica who'd aged out of foster care at 18 and was now, thanks to our foundation's scholarship, starting her freshman year at the University of Washington studying engineering. That's where Abuela would have wanted me to be. 18 months after that inheritance meeting, I stood in the Queen and Craftsman house, Abuela's house, now legally and completely mine. I'd been renovating it slowly, carefully, preserving the original woodwork and craftsman details that Grandpa had loved. The house wasn't just a property anymore. It was the foundation's headquarters. The main floor held our offices. The upstairs apartments housed 4 young adults transitioning out of foster care, giving them stable housing while they attended college or job training programs. On the mantel sat a photo of Abuela from her younger years. Standing next to Grandpa in front of their first rental property. She looked proud and determined, ready to build something that mattered. "We did it, Abuela," I whispered to the photo. "We're helping kids who need it most. We're creating real opportunities. This is what you wanted." My phone buzzed. A text from my property manager, tenant at Portland Property, sent thank you note. Says this is the first stable home she's had in 15 years. Thought you'd want to see it. The attached photo showed a handwritten note. "Thank you for being a fair and caring landlord. You've given my family stability when we needed it most." This was wealth. Not the dollar amounts in my portfolio or the property values in my portfolio. This, knowing that the resources Abuela built were creating stability, opportunity, and hope. My parents and Marcus eventually stopped calling. The family fractured completely, with some relatives siding with them, others remaining neutral, and a few quietly reaching out to express support for what I was doing with the foundation. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd spent 28 years seeking validation from people who'd never see my value. But Abuela had seen it. And that was enough. Today, the Carmen Rivera Foundation has awarded 127 full college scholarships. Housed 64 youth in stable transitional apartments. Created 43 job placements with partner employers. Maintained a 94% program completion rate. The property portfolio now includes 2 additional apartment buildings I purchased specifically to house foster youth. The rental income fully funds the foundation's operations, making it sustainable indefinitely. Last month, Jessica, the engineering student I'd met on Marcus's sentencing day, graduated summa cum laude with a job offer from Microsoft. She sent me a photo of herself in her cap and gown with a note. I aged out of foster care with $200 and a garbage bag of clothes. You gave me a chance to build a real future. Thank you. That photo sits on my desk now, next to Abuela's picture. Sometimes people ask if I regret how things ended with my family. If I wish I'd been more forgiving, more willing to keep the peace. I tell them the truth. I regret nothing. Abuela taught me that legacy isn't about keeping peace with people who don't respect you. It's about using your resources to create meaningful change. It's about seeing people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be. My parents wanted to showcase a successful son who stole from his grandmother. Marcus wanted properties he felt entitled to despite his crimes. They wanted appearances and status. Abuela wanted impact and integrity. She chose the daughter who understood the difference. And I've spent every day since proving she chose correctly.